little more complicated now because the economy is going through a bunch of things, and we don't always really know whether you have a mild recession or hard recession. And if it happens, we're going to be fine. I feel terrible for people who lose jobs. We want to keep it as short as possible. The catastrophic effects of an actual default, not the debates. I understand both sides how they want to use it. That's catastrophic, or potentially catastrophic. I would never take that risk. America is the most prosperous nation the world's ever seen. Our basic principles of freedom of speech, freedom of religion are unbelievable. The innovation is unparalleled anywhere around the world. So start with that. It's an amazing position of strength. The economy is going through a bunch of things, and we don't always really know whether you have a mild recession or hard recession. And if it happens, we're going to be fine. I feel terrible for people who lose jobs. We want to keep it as short as possible. I do think you're right about a turning point. But that turning point is about geopolitics. That's about Ukraine, oil, Russia, war, migration, food, national security, China, trade, that whole bucket of things. And I'd put in that category quantitative tightening, which is basically reducing liquidity in the banking system of the world. That is actually, forget us for a second, it could be very difficult, high dollar, the dollar going up, higher rates, and quantitative tightening on smaller countries around the world.
The World Bank and the IMF have been warning about this for a while.
And so I'm saying you got to put that whole mix in what's happening in geopolitics. Ukraine is a turning point where maybe all this illusion that we had that somehow the world's at peace and everything's going to be fine, that should have been shattered. And therefore we should be thinking about how can America do great in the next 100 years? What policies should we have?
Some would look and say, okay, it wasn't the worst case scenario in Europe in terms of severe recession. They're finding ways to get oil and gas elsewhere. Do you think in the same way now as you did then in terms of risk?
I think even more so.
Really?
I mean, that's a false sense of security that you've had this war going on, for 9 months or whatever, and that somehow it's okay. Oil prices went way up. Europe's going to a recession. Migration has been extraordinary. You haven't seen the full effect of food prices around the world. If you go to Europe, they're taking this much more seriously than Americans are. They're on the front line. You have those missiles going to Poland. You have basically nuclear blackmail. I mean, it is as serious as you can get. So we should all hope it goes away, that there's some kind of armistice or settlement, that's good for Ukraine, by the way. The danger of this war is extraordinary, and it can go on for years. But this oil and gas thing, it looks like the Europeans will get through it this winter. But this oil and gas problem is going to go on for years. So if I was in the government or anywhere else, I'd say I have to prepare for getting much worse. I hope it doesn't, but I would definitely be preparing for it to get much worse.
What does that look like to you in terms of what should be prepared for on the energy front?
On the energy front, we need secure, reliable, cheap oil and gas. The problem, a lot of people think that oil and gas prices being high is good for CO2. It's not. So cheap, reliable, you're looking at Germany, I mean, the Europeans are terrified. Their energy prices are 2, 3, 4, 5 times ours, which is hurting consumers, which the governments have to do something about, and it's hurting businesses. And it's just started, and so the pain and suffering can get a lot worse. So, it has the benefit. Lower prices have the benefit of having more production. Okay, they have the benefit of helping poor nations, lower income individuals, our allies who are desperate for more secure energy, and CO2, because quite predictably, carbon emissions, are going up because nations rich and poor around the world are turning back on their coal plants. They cannot afford expensive energy, and they can't afford no energy. So, to me, to solve climate, we kind of need all the above: permitting, plans. Gas is the best and cleanest way to reduce coal, which is the best way to reduce CO2. So, really thoughtful policy, comprehensive policy will get us there. But it also is military policy, economic policy, including trade. So when I say economic, I'm talking about, trade is one thing, but economic is investment rights. So anything that relates to national security will have to be changed.
What is it going to take to increase lending to companies so they can make those investments?
This is a little more complicated now because part of it is the companies don't want to do it.
Why?
Part of it, when people talk about excise profit tax, that's one. They can't get permits done, they can't get leasing and stuff like that. And part of it is their investors are putting a lot of pressure on them.
To go green.
To go green, but not to invest too much capital where you're not making a profit with oil at a high price. Right now, it's come down considerably, mostly because China's slowed down and Europe's going to recession. and that people think there might be a world recession, so the future price of oil is going down. Those things will reverse. And this underinvestment in oil and gas, it will hurt you 2 or 3 years out. That's quite predictable, but it's not today. And so we have time. You know, I'm hoping the administration, you know, they're looking at all these issues. I've spoken to John Podesta, now runs the IRA Act, about what we can do to accelerate, to reduce CO2, but have better, cheaper, more secure energy, not just for us, but for our particular allies around the world. I think we need, I've called a Marshall Plan for energy, you know, and that's got to be all the above and all the people involved.
But the IRA you referred to, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's just a sliver of what you're imagining for a Marshall Plan.
Yeah, no, and that is a huge, I mean, we're still studying every piece of it for renewables and EVs and a lot of different things, but it's not just that. It's the infrastructure we're building, it's competition around the world, it's access to rare earths. I mean, when you dig into it, it's a really complex thing.
Those are the things, the ingredients needed for electric vehicles that
Exactly.
China has a monopoly on right now, essentially.
They have a monopoly in production, not on where it is. So we have rare earths in America.
Right.
Whether we can produce them here or not, because of certain laws and requirements, that's a different issue. We need to build grids. You know, we don't get permissions to permits to build grids. So, you know, one of the deals that was done between the president and Joe Manchin was the permitting bill. That permitting bill is for pipelines. We need to get gas to Louisiana, to get that Louisiana gas to Europe, to help our allies and reduce the cost there. That also reduces their coal usage. So it's very green if you look at it on the margin. And so it gets very complicated, and we just need to do the work.
Are people here hearing what you're trying to explain in terms of market dynamics and investment?
Yeah. So I think it's sometimes justifiable when people talk across each other because damage was done. The damage was done in the financial crisis. Not all the big banks would have failed, and not everyone was equally guilty and all that. But and then of course people have simple political slogans that get them elected or something. But I think there's a lot of talk. We talk all the time to the Biden administration at multiple levels. And we should. I'm going to help any president try to do the best job for America, and those conversations are pretty intense.
You had said in this country you were happy about the midterm results.
On both parties, the wingnuts didn't get elected, and so the rational thing. When I was just in Congress, I was gratified by the thought they want to make progress, and I think they can make progress.
The risk is once power shifts come January that it could become
I would say government
problem.
Funding. Look, it's not the way to
Could
run.
be used as
It's not the way to run a railroad. I mean, basically, you end up spending much more money too, because the American public may not know. You pay people, and then you pay them more to come back to work. It costs us much more money. So even if you want to be fiscally responsible, it's not a good idea. The debt ceiling is, you're talking about June of next year, and we'll deal with that later.
Right. Well, there's some debate about whether it should be done now in these last few weeks while Democrats still have control to avoid that kind of
They should, because the catastrophic effects of an actual default, not the debates, I understand both sides, how they want to use it, that's catastrophic, or potentially catastrophic. I would never take that risk. So for me, yes, I'd get it done now. Take it off the table.
The world's changed a lot since 2019. I wonder what you were thinking right now.
I'm kind of the same place. I just think we need rational policy, really rational policy. And a lot of that policy is not Democrat or Republican. Getting proper infrastructure built is not Democrat or Republican. We should all acknowledge that inner city schools don't work particularly well in a lot of areas. Half the kids don't graduate. That's not Democratic or Republican. That's acknowledging the problem and then talking about solutions. Healthcare, we have the best in the world. Hell, I'm a beneficiary of it. But we also have some of the worst. It costs almost 20% of GDP, 50 million people uninsured, huge obesity, high blood pressure, a lot of things which are fixable. And I can go on and on and on. We need good policy. Good, and no policy is sometimes bad policy.
Some of their COVID restrictions, maybe moving away from COVID zero. How do you see this impacting in the long and short term?
I think they want to get their economy going again. And that's a function of capital, COVID laws, trade, and things like that. And they've just started to have real conversations, or they said they're going to with the Biden administration. The most important thing about China and America is that we actually talk, that we actually get engaged at a detailed level about where we agree, where we disagree, and try to resolve these things. Then also work on some of the things we got to do together. Climate, terrorism, nuclear proliferation, bioterrorism. That's in all of our interest to fix those problems, and you can't do it without America and China.
Because it's not just the second largest economy in the world. Our countries are incredibly intertwined.
They're incredibly intertwined. But what you really need is American leadership to do this and to bring our allies in. If we do it just bilaterally, it will not work. Because the Chinese will go negotiate separate better deals with, God knows how many different countries. So we need to do it kind of in combination with allies.
How do you think about that and the increased conversation about trying to find separate supply chains and weaning ourselves off of cheap Chinese manufacturing?
Yeah. What we need is tough negotiations. And you've already mentioned, so national security, that's going to be about semiconductors, rare earths, penicillins. That's unilateral. The Chinese do that, we do it. Most businesses support it. That gets very complicated when you talk about export controls and investment controls. But basically, the government's working with people like us and a lot of other companies about how do you implement something like that is good for national security, but doesn't diminish American business doing well overseas. Some of that alternative will be that we need better development finance, better diplomacy. We need better rules around how banks or companies can go down and invest in foreign countries to do things that make sense. So the body is pretty good, but it has really irritated the Europeans, because it's buy America, build America. It's a huge disadvantage for a part of the world we need very, very good relations with. The president did say we can tweak it, modify it, and
the electric vehicles.
And I think that could be done.
Yeah.
But here's the really important part of this. It's not just that. If Europe goes its own way in trade, and they said they're going to do their own IRA bill, be their own trade bloc, buy America, buy Europe, build Europe, that is very bad for the global negotiators of trade. That is very bad for national security.
Know if someone is creditworthy, if they've never owned a home, they've never had a bank account.
When you're here and you ask and you know the neighborhoods and you work with government, you do multiple things. You can use other facts that are not used in traditional underwriting. Like, have you paid rent for 10 years? So you and I would both say if there is a mother or father or family paying rent for 10 years, that's a good credit sign. So we take a little bit of a stretch on that. The government here came up with a very special program to put in the seed money to rehab the whole block. Once they rehab the whole block, we can step in and start making mortgages so people can buy the homes and live there. And so there are multiple paths to do it. On the Entrepreneur of Color Fund that we do, small businesses, we give them an advisor too. That gives us great comfort that they're doing the right things.
The Fed's also trying to cool off a housing market bubble.
We look right through that, and we will look past the actual rates. And remember, the important thing about mortgages, and this is why I do criticize some public policies sometimes, mortgages are how most Americans got their net worth.
Right.
And if you can't get a smaller mortgage to buy a house, it's hard to build your net worth. Mortgages are also, by the way, how often people funded their small business startup. So it is absolutely critical. And one of the things that we've been trying to change a little bit is because of all excessive rules now, and I'm not talking about things that would make risk worse, about origination, servicing, securitization, the cost of a small mortgage is probably 50 basis points higher than it should be. So that $150,000 mortgage or $200,000 mortgage is less affordable by a lot of people. And that's because of regulatory policy. That's not because of bank policy.